Awesome. Welcome, everybody. My name is Daniel Bray Ortega, and I'm the program specialist at the SGSO Network. And I'm really excited to join you all here for our webinar, Real Life Garden Heroes, teaching about remarkable people to improve literacy and SEL skills. So this webinar is going to be all about how we can make connections between the curriculum that we're teaching and tie some folks that maybe students are going to be both inspired and they can see themselves within them. So, and I'm super excited for our presenter, Adam Wright, to come and help us present about this topic, this really exciting topic. So if we can go on to the next slide, that would be awesome. So just some housekeeping, everybody. Everybody that registered, you will be receiving a recording of this webinar via email, and it will also be posted on our website and our recording library as well. So this will be of everything that you're seeing will be available by tomorrow. I will also drop in the chat a resource handout curated by our amazing presenter. This includes some resources that he identified as important for you to have as we move forward and helpful. And if you want to follow along with the slides, they're also available there as well. This webinar will be 75 minutes long. We will have about 1 hour of content of hearing really amazing content from a presenter, and then we will leave the last 15 minutes for a question and answer. So if you have any questions, through this presentation, just add them in the chat and I will be compiling them so we can hear from our presenter during Q&A. So by all means, as your questions come on in, start typing them in the chat, and don't worry, we'll get them answered. So because this is also a Zoom meeting, I will ask everybody to please keep yourself on mute so we can focus on our presenter today. And if you would like to even go a step further, you can also pin our presenter by going the 3 little dots on his screen and click the button pin. Oh, actually, I can spotlight it for everybody now. Great. So everybody, if we can go on to and also we want to hear your feedback as well. So if you follow this link, and I will also drop it in the chat, you can share your feedback. We want to hear what you enjoyed today, what you and you want to hear about more. So this will be shared in the chat as well briefly. There we go. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Some general announcements here at the SGSO Network. This is just a reminder that we have peer learning communities. If there's a topic that you're really excited about to connect with people, whether it be by something related to your role, maybe to your type of organization, or maybe a specific topic that you would like to talk about and connect with other school garden folks, these are peer learning communities that you can join. These are all facilitated and started by members, and they determine how they want to handle those spaces, how often they want to meet, and in what ways they want to use that space. In the screen, you can see some of our available active peer learning communities, as well as affinity groups. And this is also a reminder that for affinity groups, we just have to make sure that you are of that identity to be able to join that affinity group. So you can scan the QR code or follow the link that is also going to be dropped in the chat to learn about our peer learning communities and join. And if you would like to start one, you can also send me an email at info@sgsonetwork.org, and we can talk next steps if you would like to create a new peer learning community. Next slide, please. This is also an announcement that the application for the SGSO Leadership Institute will be coming out soon. So the SGSO Leadership Institute is a leadership training retreat hosted by Whole Kids and Life Lab in partnership with the SGSO Network. And this is a week-long retreat in Santa Cruz, California, where leaders of SGSOs can collaborate, be together, collaborate, learn from each other, and also create resources that will be shared, that can be shared and will be shared with the rest of the network. So be on the lookout. The application will be coming out in the next few weeks. And the focus for this year, every Leadership Institute has a focus. The focus on this year is going to be on farm to cafeteria or garden to cafeteria programs. So if you feel like you're a good fit for for this year's institute, right, I will drop in the chat the link to the information page, and be on the lookout as well for, yeah, I know, it's really exciting news. Be on the lookout for the application coming out in the next few weeks. We will definitely announce it in our social media as well. Next slide, please. And this is also a reminder that this webinar is part of the Growing School Garden Summit webinar series. So this series is all about presentations that were given in the Growing School Garden Summit back in March. And these are all presentations that we decided would be really exciting to share with folks. These presenters were identified as of high interest. And in the case that you missed one or you weren't able to join us back in March, these are all an opportunity for you to be able to catch them as well. So this is the third installment of our webinars for this series. And then we also have 3 more starting again back in January. So if you look in the chat, you can see the landing page for this webinar series. We're really excited to dive in. And they're all, for the ones that are past, they're all recorded as well in our webinar library. So definitely be on the lookout for this. That is it for my announcements. I'm really excited to turn it over to our amazing presenter. And please, let's welcome Adam Wright for our webinar of today. Take it away, Adam.
So hello, everyone. Welcome to my webinar, Real Life Garden Heroes, teaching about remarkable people to improve literacy and SEL skills. I'll introduce myself more in a moment, but I do just want to give a special shout out to Daniel and to SGSO just as a whole. I was very lucky to go to the first SGSO conference, which was held in Denver, just about an hour up the road from me back in 2022. And it was a really exciting opportunity. I'll be completely honest, I was actually sort of contemplating a career change at that time and wasn't sure if I wanted to stay as a garden educator. And that conference is literally the thing that changed my mind and sort of rededicated me to this work. And I was very lucky to get to go to the conference this year in 2024 and reconnect with some really amazing friends, including Daniel, who I met at that first conference, and was able to present on this really exciting curriculum. And it was also the place where I found out about some very exciting grants sponsored by Sprouts Community Foundation. And so if it wasn't for SGSO, I would not have gotten a $10,000 grant for my school garden program this September. So this is a really, really amazing network of peers and information and grant opportunities. And so I just really want to say thank you to SGSO for hosting me today and just providing so much to me. So this is just one little way that I can repay them. So I am the Agricultural Arts Program Coordinator at Mountain Song Community School in Colorado Springs. We're the only free K-8 public Waldorf school in the region. And we serve about 400 students. That does include our homeschool enrichment program as well. So I am program coordinator. I also have a full-time co-teacher who works alongside me. So we have 2 full-time employees who help run this amazing program. Almost all of our classes are held outside in our school garden. We are in Colorado though, so when it snows, we do use the teacher's classroom. We don't have our own indoor classroom, but we can use those main classrooms when need be. But our program is a required class for all 1st through 8th grade students. Our 1st graders, we have for one 45-minute period every single week. And then our 2nd through 8th graders have ag arts twice a week for 45 minutes each. So that is an hour and a half of required outdoor hands-on agricultural education that we provide to our students. And I'm very lucky to work at a school that finds value in this type of education. I know that's not the case everywhere. And if you're unfamiliar with Waldorf education, I could probably spend the whole webinar talking about what it is, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of background because it is sort of a direct connection to the curriculum we're going to talk about today. So Waldorf is sort of an alternative style of education. that was developed by a guy named Rudolf Steiner, who lived in Germany, and he developed this after World War II. And he lived in a town that was primarily inhabited by impoverished factory workers. And so he saw these families, particularly their children, really traumatized by the end of World War I. And so he wanted to develop a style of education to respond to that moment. And I have now been at my school for 6 years. So I did teach through COVID, so it is not lost on me that the type of educational system that I'm a part of was sort of built out of trauma, and that's an incredible gift that we can give to these students to sort of serve their whole being. And that is really what Waldorf education is about, is it's a whole child approach. So our school's mission is to honor the head, heart, and hands of every single child who comes here. We are a school, so we have to teach academics, right? That's sort of that head component. And the heart component is kind of more of your spirit and your social emotional learning. I think the best example I can provide of what that actually means is in Waldorf education, our kindergarten programs are entirely play-based. So our teachers are not explicitly teaching things like times tables. We are not sending our kindergartners home with homework. They are just playing throughout the day and learning how to interact with one another. With that said, it is not a free-for-all. There is very strict rhythms and routines and schedules that the children come to learn and expect. And something that's very common in Waldorf education is called a gift year. So the teacher, the kindergarten teacher, will actually meet with the families of their students, and they will decide if the child is socially and emotionally ready to move on to first grade. And if they feel like collectively that child is not, then they will give them a gift year where they're actually in kindergarten for a second year, just to better prepare themselves for success later on. So it is not a one-size-fits-all methodology by any means at all. And then we have our hands, which is very directly tied to my program. And so it's really providing hands-on experiential opportunities for our students. So almost every Waldorf school throughout the world has some sort of school garden. If you're a private school that maybe has more funding, it's not uncommon to have an entire farm with like goats and chickens and cows that the students are milking. Other programs that are very common in Waldorf schools are things like woodworking, where the students learn carpentry, handwork, where the students are learning how to like knit and crochet and make their own toys and clothes. So again, it's a whole child approach of honoring the head, the heart, and the hands of the child. And I would say another key piece of Waldorf education is telling things through the lens of stories. And so that is really what inspired the curriculum we're going to talk about today. You do see a picture of my beautiful garden there. So like I said, most of our classes take place outside, and we have about 17 raised beds in our garden. We have a 20-foot geodesic dome greenhouse that you can see in the background there. We also have 6 chickens. We have a fish pond inside our greenhouse. We have an outdoor oven. We have a small fruit orchard. And with that $10,000 Sprouts grant that I got, we are going to be installing a 50-foot high tunnel in the next couple months, which is greatly going to expand our growing season. And I also have honeybees as well. So very, very proud of our garden. It's really exciting, and we just have a ton of incredible opportunities for our students. So that's just a little bit about the program. Let's dive into this curriculum. So the Remarkable People curriculum that I am going to talk to you guys about today was developed by my co-teacher, Matt Thomas. He is an amazing man to work with, and I'm very proud to call him my friend. And a lot of the people and activities and books that we're going to talk about today came from him. So I just want to give him full credit for working alongside me. So this curriculum highlights great achievements from individual people who've done remarkable things in the worlds of agriculture, cooking, science, environmental activism, really anything that you can tie to the garden or the kitchen or really nature as a whole. And so we teach this to our second graders for the entire school year. This is the only thing that I teach to my second graders for an entire year. With that said, it did not start that way. We sort of developed this with, I think, maybe 6 or 7 people originally. So that was like a quarter. And then it went so well that the following year we're like, hey, let's do this for a whole semester. And it went so well that I was like, hey, let's just make it the whole year. And if it doesn't work, it's something we tried. And the kids have responded so positively to it that it is truly one of my my favorite things that I teach in all of my 1st through 8th grade classes. I'm very, very proud of this curriculum, and I'm so excited to share it with you. So the way that we sort of teach this unit is we do 2 lessons per person. One lesson, and it's usually the first lesson, is we will read a children's book by or about that person. Sometimes it's by that person too, if they're still alive. And then we will do an activity that is directly related to or inspired by that person. And I'm going to give you so many examples of these people and activities later on in the webinar. With that said, I do not want this webinar to intimidate you. Please do not walk away from this being like, oh my gosh, how am I going to like teach 25 people like throughout the whole school year? If you walk away today with one person who you feel like is going to connect with your students and your program, that is a victory for me. Ideally, I would love you to walk away with like a handful of people, maybe like 3, 4, 5 people that you could incorporate into your curriculum. And I am positive that this curriculum can translate to different ages, younger ages than 2nd grade, older ages, even up into high school or possibly college. And this is something that if you cannot teach throughout a whole school year, maybe it's like, hey, I'm going to pick 5 people and we're going to just learn about each one of them for one day throughout the course of the week. Or maybe, you know, I can do one person for 1 month throughout the school year, or whatever your program timeline is. So just know this is very adaptable and very flexible. I also want to give a huge, huge shout out to the authors, publishers, and libraries who have enabled me to teach this curriculum. There has been a huge push, I would say, in the past 5 to 10 years in children's publishing to not only have more diverse authors, but also to celebrate more diverse voices. And of the 25 people that I teach about every year, I probably knew who 2 of them were when I was in 2nd grade, and that was John Deere and George Washington Carver. Almost all the other people I'm going to talk to you about today, I did not know even existed when I was a 2nd grader. And that's because their stories weren't really being told either in books or other forms of media. So I really, really want to thank again the authors, the publishers, and the libraries who have sort of created a space for these books to be made. This whole curriculum was sort of created back in 2020, which I don't know what you were doing in 2020, but it was a pretty interesting time here in America, culturally, historically, and I felt it was very important as an educator to try and respond to that moment. And so this is an incredible way to bring in elements of diversity, equity, inclusion into your classroom. I think sadly, we're in a climate where some people push back on those phrases, and I am very disappointed by that. But what is even more important to me as an educator is representation. I'm very aware of my status as a white man in the world. And if the only people that I'm teaching my children about are people who look like me, then I am failing them. And we're all failing them if that's what you're doing in your own classrooms. It's so, so important for children to see themselves in the people that we are teaching them about. And at the end of this day, this curriculum is essentially about empowering young people to go on and do great things, because you will learn that kind of a theme of most of these people's lives is that they were told that they could not do something because of how they looked or because of the society they were born into. And I want all of my students, regardless of what sort of situation they were born into, what they look like, to be empowered to go on and do great things and change the world. I think that's why we're all teachers. So this is a curriculum is a really, really great way just to bring in those elements of representation and diversity into your classroom. With all of the different activities we do, this is also a great way to cater to different diverse learning styles, and just keep that in mind while we're talking today about these specific people and activities, what you think your students might respond to best. We've got a lot of like cooking activities, we've got art activities, we've got science activities, we've got verbal activities, we've got reading activities. There's so many different ways to connect with your specific population of students based on how they learned. And again, I want my students to feel empowered by this unit. So this is a really great way to connect with social emotional learning, which again is so deeply important in Waldorf education. And I do think in the past couple of years, I've started to see this idea of social emotional learning become more important in more traditional public school formats. So it is catching on, but our students have to be able to be resilient young people and learn to love themselves and take on the challenges of the world. And if they can't do that, how are they going to learn about like math or science, right? And so along those lines, how we start this entire curriculum is we ask the students, who is someone you know that is remarkable in your own life? So it's not someone famous, it's not like Taylor Swift, it is someone in your own life. And we do teach the students the meaning of the definition of remarkable, and we ask them, like, what does that mean? We try to get them to kind of come up with their own definitions, but the definition we like to learn or talk about is someone who's worthy of attention. And what would you do to be worthy of attention from other people? And so when we ask this question, we do a little like sort of art activity where the kids get to draw the person they're talking about. They get to write down a few words to describe that person. And then we also ask them just to write like one sentence, what would you do with that person when you get a chance to spend time with them? So most of these kids are picking their mom or their dad or their grandma, but sometimes it might be like their church youth group leader or their soccer coach or their neighbor. And it's always really just heartwarming to see who they come up with. So let's start talking about some of the people that we actually teach the kids about. So I will say the first 4 people that I'm going to talk about today are always the first 4 people that I teach the kids about. And I do that for very specific reasons. Once we kind of get past these first 4 people, we mix and match who we talk about. And I have a list of way more people than I can even teach in 1 year. So 1 year I might talk about one person, and the next year I might talk about them at all. But just know that I don't keep like a strict order for how I teach these people outside of these first 4. So the first person that I teach the students about is Alice Waters. I hope all of you know who she is, because a lot of us probably have jobs because of her. But if you're unfamiliar with her, she is a sort of a celebrity chef based out of California. She developed a very well-known restaurant called Chez Pani in San Francisco, and she sort of used the fame and clout that she got from that restaurant to establish the edible schoolyard, because she noticed in her neighborhood there was a school where the students weren't necessarily being well fed, and she, as a chef, really wanted children to have fresh, healthy food and to understand where that food came from. So she spent like 2 or 3 years of her life turning a parking lot into a school garden in her own neighborhood. And people kind of thought she was crazy. This, I think, was back like maybe early 90s that this occurred. But she really believed in this, and it was a huge success. And it was such a success that now it is, you know, an entire organization, and there are edible schoolyards all throughout the country. And I'm sure some of you maybe use their curriculum that they offer to people, or maybe even trained with them. But as a school garden educator, I probably wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for Alice Waters, simply because she, again, used her fame and clout to really bring legitimacy to having gardens at schools. And it's still a bit of an uphill battle, but I definitely think in the past, 20, 30 years, since she built her first garden, that this movement is taken off. And of course, this is not the only person that we can give like credit to for the school garden movement, but she is someone who is incredibly influential. So I love teaching her as the first person, because you can directly connect it to your own garden. And there are so many things that you can do that are tied into this. And because we teach this at the beginning of the school year, it's when we kind of the most bounty in our garden. And so sometimes we'll do like cooking demonstrations, we'll do salad parties, maybe we'll work and do chores in the garden. There's also a section of the book where they talk about when Alice was a young girl, she won a costume contest at school, and she made her entire outfit of food. She had like an asparagus crown and like blueberry bracelets and stuff, and there's a picture of her in her outfit. So another activity that we've done with the kids is we allow them to create their own food costume. We do not use real food like Alice did, but we allow them to draw a picture, and it's really cool to see what they come up with, like roller skates made out of carrots and sweaters made out of popcorn. It's a really, really fun activity. And again, I just think Alice Waters is such an incredible introduction to this curriculum. The next person that we talk about is Jane Goodall. My co-teacher, Matt, his background is actually in wildlife biology. That's what his bachelor's degree is in. So Jane Goodall is like a personal hero of his, and same thing with Alice Waters. So we kind of each get to bring in our own hero at the beginning. And Jane Goodall is probably the world's leading primatologist. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her work. She literally lived in the jungle for years, working alongside apes, specifically chimpanzees, and she learned a huge amount about these animals and was specifically the first person to learn that chimpanzees, like humans, used tools. And so what she learned sort of just challenged our own assumptions about wildlife and nature and evolution and how we just think about animals in general. And there are many, many, many children's books about Jane Goodall. This is not the only one, but there's a very well-known series of books called Little People, Big Dreams about a lot of influential figures. And we really like this one about Jane Goodall. And the activity that we connect to Jane is we ask the students to think of their own favorite animal and what they would do to either help or try to rescue that animal if it was endangered. And it's really heartwarming to see what the kids come up with. You know, sometimes it could be something as simple as, you know, I'm feeding a polar bear, but this year we had a kid who loves cats, so he drew a picture of him like standing in front of a cat cafe, and there was a bulldozer coming to bulldoze the cat cafe, and he was like protesting in front of the cat cafe so it was not destroyed. So it's always really just fun to see what these kids come up with when you ask them questions like this. So the third person that we teach the students about is George Washington Carver. He was one of the most famous scientists who have ever lived in America. He was specifically an agricultural scientist and was arguably the first African-American scientist to really hold relevance and power in America. And I love this story because most of this story takes place when George is a child. And so this book is called The Secret Garden of George Washington Carver. And so when he was little, he loved flowers, and he was very sort of ashamed of that because he was sort of raised to think that boys shouldn't like flowers. So he had this like secret garden that he kept hidden for years and years and years, and he would literally like nurse flowers back to life. And then one day someone found out, and rather than shaming him, they actually like, wow, like you're incredibly talented. We didn't know you could do that. And so he sort of became known as like the flower doctor in his neighborhood, and he started nursing other people's flowers and plants back to health. And then that sort of just set him on a life path of loving flowers and nature and agriculture. And then he went on to be one of the very first African Americans to go to college, receive a degree, and one of the very first African American to become a college professor as well. And he actually got his degree from Iowa State University, which is where I got my master's degree in agriculture as well. So I'm very, very proud to teach the kids about Mr. Carver. And if you don't know who he is, he's the peanut guy. He developed over 300 different uses for peanuts, different food products, things like paint and glue. It's really astounding all the things that he developed, and was really trying to also empower other African American farmers to grow this crop and create better lives for themselves. And again, I love this book because most of it is set in his childhood, so the kids can really relate to that. And I also like this book because it doesn't shy away from the harsh realities of Dr. Carver's life. He was born into slavery. His mom was a slave. She disappeared when he was a child. He faced a lot of racism in his lifetime. Again, he was told he could not do a lot simply because of the way he looked. And I think it is done in a way that is very, very age appropriate. And as an educator, I feel like oftentimes we sort of patronize our children and feel like they can't handle certain topics. And certainly as educators, our role is not to make our children afraid, but I do think we should prepare them for the realities of the world and what certain people have faced. And I think this book does it in a really beautiful, really age appropriate way that doesn't just sort of skim over, again, those harsh realities of his life. And I just think he's a really incredibly remarkable person. Now, the next person that we teach our student about is Temple. Oh, before I move on to her, I should say the activities that we do for George Washington Carver is we usually cook with our students. And I know peanuts can sometimes be like a no-go in certain schools. And if you cannot cook with peanut in your school, you can use sun butter. That's a great sort of allergy-free alternative that has a very similar texture and flavor profile to peanuts. But again, we do this early in the year, so we want to sort of use what is growing in our garden. And so we have made things like peanut butter pancakes. Last year, we did like a stir fry with different vegetables from the garden. We made like a Thai peanut sauce to drizzle over it. And there's lots of other activities that you can teach related to Mr. Carver based out of gardening. And you all are going to get a resource handout at the end of this webinar. And so a lot of these activities will be on there as well. So the fourth person that we talk about is Dr. Temple Grandin. She lives right here in Colorado, and she is one of the world's leading livestock experts. Specifically, her work revolves around cattle. And I love teaching Temple Grandin because one, she lives here in Colorado, so we kind of have a local connection with her, but she also lives with autism spectrum disorder. And again, this book, which is authorized by her. She's got like a note that she signs at the end of the book. But what I love about this book, again, it doesn't sort of shy away from the harsh realities of her childhood and her life. And when she was first born, she was nonverbal. She did not speak for many, many years. She was very discriminated against by her peers, by her teachers, by doctors. They actually tried to institutionalize her at one point, and her parents were like, "What are you talking about? We are not doing that to her child." So she was someone who basically, because of what she was born with, was told that she couldn't do things or accomplish things, and she overcame that. And autism kind of is her superpower. And the reason the book is called The Girl Who Thought in Pictures is because she literally thinks in pictures. And if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism, because it affects different people in different ways. But with her brand of autism, she again sort of sees the world in pictures, and she was able to connect that to livestock. She's like, animals don't necessarily use, you know, language to communicate in the same way we do. And so she used her way of thinking to sort of relate that to cattle, and then developed this thing called a cattle chute, which basically is used in really worldwide on many different farms and facilities. And it's basically a way to keep cattle calm as they are transported. And like I said earlier, representation really, really matters. I work at a school where about 25% of our students have identified special needs and are on 504s or IEPs. And again, that's identified. I'm sure the number is much higher because we're always bringing in new students who may not have a diagnosis yet. So it is so important to me to teach Dr. Grandin's story, because almost every single one of our classrooms has a student with autism, if not multiple students with autism. And so this is a story that empowers those students and also helps to teach empathy and understanding to the other students in class as well. And every single time we read this student, there's always one, or every time we read this book, there's always one student who kind of has like an aha moment of like, oh yeah, so-and-so has autism, or my brother has autism, or my uncle has autism. And so it just sort of normalizes it. And I love bringing that to the students. Now, the reason that we teach those four people is, again, Alice Waters, I think, is a great introduction to this curriculum because she helped start school gardens. Jane Goodall is sort of a personal hero of my co-teachers. I love George Washington Carver's story of like resilience, which again is an ongoing theme throughout most of these people's lives. But we, for our activity inspired by Dr. Grandin, do a memory game. And so this is basically, I'm sure you guys have like played the game of memory. Sometimes it's called match. Usually comes in like a little cardboard box with like little tiles, and basically you flip them all over, and then when it's your turn, you get to pick two and you flip them over, and if it's a match, well, you got a match, and if they don't match, you put them exactly back where you put them, and then the next person tries to find a match. So we created our own memory game inspired by Dr. Grandin. And basically what we've done is we have a picture of every remarkable person. So this is Alice Waters in her home kitchen. And if you found her match, here is Alice Waters in one of the edible schoolyards that she founded. We also have Jane Goodall, who is in the jungle here by herself. And then we also have her with one of her ape friends. We have Dr. Carver, and of course, his match is Peace. We have Dr. Grandin, who's very famous for her Western shirts that she wears. And then, of course, her match is Cattle. And so the way we do this is we've created enough sets for 2 kids to play at the same time, but it could be done in small groups. It could be done with like 4 kids or 5 kids. And I love this because we can play this many times per year. So we always introduce this after the first 4 people. And then after we teach another 4 or 5 or 6 people, we will play the game again, and we will incorporate cards that we have specifically created for those remarkable people. So this is an incredible way to reinforce the knowledge of each remarkable person that the kids learn about. And the kids love this game. Again, I've got 45-minute periods. This easily fills 45 minutes. I mean, I think they could play this for like hours if they wanted to. And when they find out that they get to like play it again, like in an upcoming class, they get so excited. Something else we've done with this memory game is we've had a little fun. So here's a picture of my co-teacher, Mr. Matt, and his favorite animal are bears. So this is a little match that we throw in there. And then conversely, here is your very handsome presenter for the day. And my favorite animals are elephants. So this is just a way sort of to reinforce who we are and to develop those relationships with the kids. And then we've also got a little set with our school rules, which are be kind, be safe, be respectful, and be responsible. So you can sort of sneak in your own little memory cards to this game as well. I really wish I could say at the end of this webinar, I've got like a magic little link that you could click on and print out all of these pictures, but I sadly do not have this because again, this is a curriculum that we have developed over years. And as we bring in new people, we sort of just make new cards. And so it is quite time consuming to have made this game, but it's something that has continued to sort of just give back to us. So I think it's well worth the investment. And I will say, I think a big part of it is related to the memory game. I think a big part of it is related to just the people that we choose. But I'm skipping ahead here a little bit, but at the very end of the unit, we do a sort of social emotional capstone project. And I'm very, very, very proud of the fact the first year that we did this curriculum throughout the entire school year, I asked every student to write down who their favorite remarkable person was. And every single remarkable person that we taught was named by at least one student as their favorite. And for second graders to remember like every single person that you've taught them about over the course of a year, like that's incredible. So I think this memory game, especially for younger students, is just a really great way to reinforce that. Yeah, so let's move on to some of our other folks. And like I said, I've got about 25 people that I teach about. I'm not going to have time today to talk about every single person that we teach about, but you again will receive that resource handout later on, and that has every single person that we have identified for this curriculum, the book or books that we use for that person, and then also the activities that we have used as well. So just know that not everyone I'm talking about today is the entire list. So the next person I'm going to talk about is Diana Hawkins. I'm going to imagine that not too many of you are familiar with her. She is a young girl who grew up in the White House. Her father was actually in President Franklin Roosevelt's cabinet. And so she grew up around a lot of very powerful and influential people, and she grew up in a lot of chaotic world events and wars. And she really, really wanted to help out the people she was surrounded by. And she got in a lot of trouble living in the White House and sort of sticking her nose in things that maybe she shouldn't. And so ultimately, she was able to collaborate with FDR's wife and create the first victory garden at the White House. And that victory garden then inspired the entire nation during World War II to start growing their own food, because a huge issue at that time was we had so many soldiers abroad, and there was a food shortage at the time that a lot of Americans were going hungry. And of course, we're coming right out of the Great Depression and stuff. And so creating this victory garden on the grounds of the White House literally inspired so many other people to start growing their foods. Their own food. It was considered a patriotic act. And I love this story because it shows the children that you do not have to be an adult to be remarkable. I know that adults hold a lot of power and privilege and money in this world, right? But you don't have to have any of those things to be remarkable. And you can be 6 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, and still change the world, which Diana did. And there's also a cute little dog in this story as well. So the kids love this book and always respond well to it because she's so close in age to the kids. And then in terms of activities, there's so many things that you can do related to this. Again, the whole book is about gardening, so you can pretty much do anything in your garden. You can harvest things, you can do chores, you can get out and compost. We've also let the kids like create their own garden before. I keep a lot of like seed catalogs that are mailed to me, and then we'll use those for collage projects. So one of the activities we've done is just like letting the kids like cut out different flowers and vegetables that they like from these catalogs, and they get to create sort of their own garden. So there's a huge amount of inspiration you can take from Diana Hopkins. The next person that I want to talk about is one of my favorites. It is Cesar Chavez, who is a very, very well-known farm labor activist and human rights activist. He grew up in the American Southwest, but moved to California when he was a fairly young boy due to droughts that were affecting the American Southwest. And so his family was very, very successful when he was a young kid in terms of farming. And then when they moved to California, their status in the world greatly diminished because they basically became and other people were working in. And so
Hey, Adam, you might need to repeat that last part.
civil disobedience to fight for us.
Apologies, everyone. I think we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty. The internet is a little excited about Cesar Chavez as well, it seems.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, Melanie, I saw it.
No, a different question. Is
Uh,
this meant for second grade kids?
We talked about this. This curriculum is not necessarily only for second graders. This is a curriculum that can be applied, or bits and pieces of it can be applied at different levels. Good question. We will have, if anyone else has any other questions, you can put them in the chat. We will go into Q&A in about 15 more minutes, and don't worry, I've seen other questions as well in there. So we'll drop them in the chat, and we'll have Adam answering them.
All right, I think I'm back. I'm sorry if I froze. Where did I cut out? Or Cesar Chavez?
Yeah, you were talking about Cesar Chavez.
Okay, so but to make a long story short, very, very famous human rights activist, labor activist. There are many, many different books written about him. We really like this book called Harvesting Hope, the story of Cesar Chavez. There is another book called Lado y Lado, which is about his life, as well as another farm activist, Dolores Huerta, and that's actually a bilingual book. And so that's a really great thing to bring in. But we love teaching the kids about Cesar Chavez. The activity that we do related to him is we usually do sort of a Spanish-English garden vocabulary activity. So we'll have different words connected to the garden in Spanish, and then the kids have to sort of figure out what those translate to in English. And you can easily tie that into any other thing that you're teaching about. If you're doing a unit on tomatoes, maybe all of those words are related to tomatoes. If you're learning about compost, you can sort of connect that all to compost. Cesar Chavez is also a great example of someone that you can teach to all ages. If you wanted to talk about Cesar Chavez in middle school or high school, maybe you don't want to do this picture book. Maybe you don't want to do a simple like English, Spanish language activity. Maybe you want to do a deep dive into immigration policies in the year 2024 and how those are impacting people. Maybe you want to write letters to your senators. Maybe you want to connect Cesar Chavez to other famous civil disobedience figures like Martin Luther King Jr. So there's lots of ways to connect him to different people. Can you guys still hear me? Awesome. Okay. The next person that I want to talk about, I don't expect you guys to actually teach your students unless you live in the Colorado Springs area. So this woman is Catherine Lee Bates. She was a English teacher from Boston who came out here for summer in the 1800s. She took a trip to the top of Pikes Peak, which is our local 14er, which is a mountain over 14,000 feet. We have about 50 or so in Colorado. And when she was up there, she wrote a little poem called America the Beautiful. And then it went on to be published in some magazines. And a couple years later, it became so famous that a composer reached out to her and it became one of our great patriotic songs. I never would have thought to have taught athletes, but I was at a local museum that we have here in Colorado Springs. It's called the Pioneers Museum. It's free and open to the public, all about local regional history. In their gift shop, they had a children's literature section, and I found this, and I was like, oh my gosh, this would be perfect to teach my kids about. And so I would really encourage you to think about local heroes that you could highlight if you wanted to teach this curriculum. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone who has a book written about them. It could be a local chef or a local activist, someone who runs a nonprofit in your area. But you can also go to your local library or your local historical society, or if you do have a small museum in your area, and use those resources to be like, hey, I would love to teach my fifth graders about, you know, someone who's a local hero who's maybe done great things for agriculture and nature, and they can help you find those resources. And again, if it wasn't for that museum, I probably wouldn't have taught this. Next person I teach my kids about is Isatou Ceesay. She's known as the Queen of Recycling. And this book, One Plastic Bag, is awesome. Her story is very powerful. She lived in a small village in Gambia. All of these plastic bags appeared one day, and at first they found them really magical because they could use them to carry things to the store and carry them back to the village. But with time, they started noticing that their goats were dying, and when they brought in a veterinarian, he told them that the goats were actually eating the plastic bags, and that's why they were passing away. And these goats were these villagers' entire livelihoods. And so what Isatou did is she started collecting the bags and turning them into bags and purses and jewelry. And then she actually started her own business. And then she started empowering other women to work for her and sort of created this little enterprise for women out of trash. And so it's a very, very powerful story related to pollution, the environment, and the activity that we do for this is we actually spend a couple weeks collecting recycled materials, things like cans, cardboard boxes, wrapping paper, whatever it is. And then the students actually create their own trash creatures from the things that we collected. And in your resource handout, there's a little video link that you can see for what the kids made this year. So they made like an alpaca. One group made a turtle. They can make a wizard or a robot. And again, if you wanted to connect Isatou Ceesay to like an older populations of students, this would be a perfect opportunity to like do a service project, you know, do some trail rebuilding, pick trash up off a highway. You can connect it to composting, etc. All right, gonna go on to our next slide here. Next person we teach about is Rachel Carson. She's a very, very well-known writer and conservationist who wrote Silent Spring. And after writing that book in the 60s and discovering the ways that chemicals were impacting wildlife, her work essentially inspired a lot of new federal rules and regulations related to environmental protection. Love this book and love the activity that we do based on this. We do something called sound maps, because the reason that Rachel Carson realized that nature was being negatively impacted by these chemicals was just by observing and sitting in silence. So we do something called a sound map, where the kids get a much larger piece of paper, they draw a circle, and they are the X in the middle. And they have to sit in silence for like 15 minutes, which again is really hard to do for second graders. And they just have to listen to the world around them. And if they hear a plane fly above them, they can draw a plane on their sound map. If they hear a bird chirp, they can draw a bird. If they feel a cricket hop off a tomato plant, they can draw a cricket, a dog bark, whatever. It is really, really amazing to see what these students create using the sound maps. Another person we teach the kids about is Mary Anning. In many ways, she's regarded as like the world's first paleontologist. If you know the tongue twister, Sally sells seashells by the seashore, that is about her. She lived sort of in England on like Victorian cliff sides and collected bones and shells, and eventually found like an entire dinosaur skeleton, and was one of the first people to do that, and then again really challenged our notion of life cycles and things like that. We are very, very lucky here in Colorado Springs that we have a local fossil bed called Coral Bluffs, and so we actually invite a group of women who volunteer at Coral Bluffs to bring in different fossils and bones for the children to look at. So this is another great way of taking sort of a famous historical person and then connecting it with real life people in your own area. Maybe you have a science museum near you and the kids can go look at dinosaur fossils there. One of the activities we've done is also compare paleontology versus archaeontology or archaeology, and what are the differences between those. All right. Let me move on to our last two people that I am going to talk about today before we get to our capstone project. So Roy Choi is a very famous Korean American chef. He's a bit of a celebrity chef. He's been on a lot of like TV shows and talk shows, things like that. He's very good friends with David Chang, if you're familiar with him. And I love this book because it talks about how Roy Choi, being a child of immigrants, was very ashamed of the food that he brought to school. And because of that, it kind of made him ashamed of his culture. And with time, he sort of fell in love with cooking, but not his own food, other people's food. He loved cooking Mexican food specifically. And so he started working on a taco truck. And then he got the idea one day of doing Korean tacos and kind of doing a fusion food, which we all know is very popular now. But at the time, people were like, you cannot do that. Your culture is not making tacos. You should not do this. But he really believed in his concept. And so he started cooking Korean tacos out of a food truck, and then eventually kind of built this food truck franchise throughout Los Angeles, and now is like a legitimate celebrity chef. So it's a really beautiful story of taking something that you do not feel like is a positive in your life, reclaiming it, and making it into something beautiful. This is the last person that we teach our kids about, because we invite a local chef who owns a food truck to actually come in and feed our students. And you also will have a video of one of those experiences on your resource handout. And I have had chefs offer to do this for free. So this is a really, really incredible book. Roy Choi is also very inspired by hip hop culture. So all of the illustrations in this book are kind of inspired by like hip hop and graffiti. And to be able to read about his story and then have an actual food truck chef come into our students and feed them is a very, very powerful experience. So do not be afraid to network and reach out to people you may or may not for my kids. It's a really connect a real life figure with someone in your own community. The last person I wanted to talk about is a young boy named Aslan Tudor. He wrote this book himself. It is called Young Water Protectors, A Story About Standing Rock. So Aslan is a young Indigenous boy who was part of the Standing Rock protest that occurred several years ago, specifically around pipelines that were going to be built through Native territory. And so all of the pictures in this book are photographs that he took of his experience for, living at Standing Rock, going to school at Standing Rock, watching his family members participate in these protests, the way that they were mistreated. And it's sort of a callback to Diana Hopkins and letting the kids know that you do not have to be an adult to be remarkable, that children do have power and autonomy in the world to speak their minds, especially when there are such sort of egregious things being done to people and the land. And then we directly tie this to our capstone project. So again, I am working with second graders. You could easily translate this into an essay if you're working with an older population. Part of being a Waldorf school is we're also a no media school. So we don't use like computers or PowerPoints or anything like that in our classroom, but you might be at a school where the kids could like create a little video about themselves. But eventually, essentially what we do is we turn the question back around to the kids and we ask them, what makes you remarkable? So we call it what makes me remarkable. That's what this picture is called. So this is my poster that I created for an example for the kids. So what we do is we ask them to title it, draw a picture of themselves, to provide 3 adjectives to describe themselves. And we want to keep those positive, because sometimes the kids will be like, I'm sneaky. And I'm like, I'm not sure if that is really a positive attribute. What if you are curious? What if you're really, but you know what I'm trying to say. I try to, I don't want the kids to think negatively of themselves. So if those are the words they're trying to ascribe, I try to find a way to turn it into a positive, right? And then we ask them 3 simple questions. I am good at, so things that they are good at, hobbies or talents, etc. I help others by. So again, it's this idea of empowering students to think of ways that they are already contributing to their families or their communities. It could be something as simple as I clean my cat's litter box every day. I help my mom do the dishes. But some of the kids are like, I volunteer at a soup kitchen with my family every Thanksgiving, it's really amazing to empower them to see what they are already doing. And then finally, we ask them, who do they admire? And that is someone we have already taught them about that they can connect to. And like I said, the first year I did this with over the course of an entire school year, every single person that we taught the kids about was named by at least one student as someone they admire. And then we present these to the entire school. Part of our school culture is every Friday morning, we have a Friday morning assembly. That's only like 10 or 15 minutes long, but we have different students present different things. It could be a poem or a song or a little skit they've created. So I have my students, excuse me, at the end of the school year, present these posters. And of course, we invite families. And for those who don't want to present or don't have time to present, I get a little easel and I set it up near our front office. And every day I put a new poster on that easel so people can see who those students are and what makes them remarkable. So I am going to turn it over to you all. And I think Daniel is going to help us with a little poll. But I would love to know of the remarkable people that that I talked about today, who is someone who you think might resonate with your students? Is it Alice Waters? Is it Roy Choi? Is it Temple Grandin? And it could be a local hero that is not necessarily on this list, but could sort of, substitute that Catherine Lee Bates that I talked about. But would love for you guys just to submit, and then I would love to have a couple people share why they feel that person excites them and what they might do in their own classrooms or gardens to teach that person. While you're doing that, I do want to say, like I said, we have way more people as part of this curriculum than we could talk about today. So make sure you check out that resource highlight. There's this really great book called John Deere. That's about John Deere and some of the inventions that he created. We have a really wonderful book called Wangari's Tree of Peace, and this is about the first African woman who ever received the Nobel Peace Prize. She planted over 1 million trees throughout her lifetime. That's a really amazing book, especially like in the spring or near Arbor Day. And then the book that we just read this week is Snowflake Bentley. And this was the very first person to ever photograph snowflakes and to discover that every single snowflake is unique. And this is a fantastic sort of seasonally appropriate book to read during the winter.
So the poll is available now. Folks are still replying. I'm gonna give it a couple more seconds, and then we'll get to see the results.
And I can already see that every person we talked about has already got 1 vote. So that is awesome.
Yeah. All right. All right. I'm gonna close it in 10 more seconds, and here we still, and there we go. I'm gonna close it up. So everybody should be,
All right.
yeah.
Well, it looks like the person who got the most votes was George Washington Carver. So if you're someone who voted for him and feels like you're comfortable speaking for a minute or two, I would love to hear why you are excited to teach him and why you feel like you might connect with your students and maybe an activity you might have in mind to help connect him with your kids.
If you feel more comfortable too, folks, feel free to also share in the chat as well.
And if you didn't vote for George and want to speak about the person you voted for, just raise your hand and go for it.
Go ahead, Melanie.
We have a local here that for the first time yesterday, he brought fresh, locally caught fish to the schools to be used in tacos. And he's been working to support the local fishermen, and they have now a little trailer where they can come and cut directly and sell directly to the community. We live in a food desert, so this is a big deal to stop the chain of production and keep it locally. And I think what he just did with the school district was so beautiful. So and he's here, I could bring him to a school and have him talk to the kids about what he's doing. So that's an example I will do here in Norte County, California.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And one of the remarkable people that we teach the students about is a Native American figure named Glooskap or Gooskabi, who's very well known through a lot of tribes. And we traditionally teach him during the month of November because he is sort of known for like saving the animals. And it's a great thing to teach kind of during this harvest time when we're eating turkey and sort of giving thanks to nature and environment. So that's just one of the people that we teach our kids about that I feel sort of connects this idea of like a local fisher who's hopefully, you know, honoring the environment and the animals and also trying to find that balance in the ecosystem, right? Thanks for sharing.
I believe we had Sandra raise her hand, and I think then we're going to transition into Q&A. But if folks still want to share, feel free to keep sharing in the chat.
Yeah, so we do a lot with George Washington Carver. I am at West Broad Street YMCA, and we're one of the last three historic Black YMCAs left in the country. So we dive really deep into things that, people that they can identify with. But on George Washington Carver, I try to get away from the peanuts because he was so much more than that. And that seems to be the only thing that's taught in the schools. And I think that limits the genius that he really was. So one of the activities we do is we go out in the garden because he was a painter first. Of course, he wanted to be an artist. And so, but he was poor. He was born a slave. So he would paint with found objects and made paint himself. So we give them clothespins and they have to go on a hunt to find sticks or whatever, leaves or whatever it is to create their own paintbrushes. And then we make paint out of different clays and stuff and dirt and stuff like that. And we have them create art based on that they have to go out and actually find everything to create the art with. So.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. And I already took a note of that because I might use that next year. We teach George Washington Carver. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that book, but I love that because, again, it is more than the peanuts. It does talk about his love for art and sort of the resourcefulness that his family helped him to develop. It talks a lot about the educational resources that he created. He had like a traveling wagon and he would go around to different communities and sort of ask them, hey, what do you need to know to be successful? So I do love that book because it definitely sort of talks about him as, just outside of that peanut realm as an educator, as an artist, et cetera. So thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, I have that book too. And then, well, I lean into the book, George Washington Carver, the original conservationist, and go into that aspect of it. And actually, we're getting ready to do a whole program at Beach Institute, which is an African-American art museum here. And it will be based on like more of his conservation stuff. We're going to do a compost pile, which was very important to him. Composting was, and rebuilding the soil, which had been stripped by all the cotton farming. So we take more of that approach to the things that he was trying to. The only reason he got into peanuts was because peanuts was a nitrogen fixer and he was trying to fix the soil. So he was trying to give them a market for the peanuts if they would grow it in order to actually heal the soil from all the cotton farming. So.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. So we're running a little bit tight on time, so we have a few more minutes together. Before we say goodbye, we're gonna do just a short Q&A. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. There was one question about how somebody asked, where do you recommend to certify yourself as a Waldorf educator?
Wow. So I would probably start with a Google search and see if there are any resources in your area or region, because there are definitely kind of schools throughout the country that offer certification. There's a very well-known one here in Colorado called Gradalis, but there's also a lot of online trainings as well, where you can do a certification over the computer and don't have to do it in person. I would also say that Rudolf Steiner, not only did he develop Waldorf education, but he also developed a type of organic farming called biodynamic farming, which is something that we use a lot here at school. So if you aren't necessarily becoming Waldorf certified, but would love to know a little bit more about how sort of his views of agriculture informed education, definitely check out some biodynamic farming either certifications or books, and that's sort of a great entryway to make that connection between Waldorf and the garden. Why is Rudolf Steiner not in your list? That is a great question. I think in the students' main classrooms, they already learned so much about Steiner that he's not necessarily someone that I feel like I need to bring back into this curriculum. I'm trying to maybe introduce people the students are not familiar with, but hey, I'm going to add him to my list because next year, maybe I should bring in some Steiner.
The chat is keeping you accountable.
Yes. And I love this. And I should say, like, So many people have helped me develop this curriculum. I've asked friends, I've sent out emails, I've asked people in different networks. And so many of these people were brought to me by others. So I really appreciate people's, ideas, and would just encourage you to have conversations with your fellow educators and community members about people that you could bring into your classrooms. And it's always growing, right? Like, I never stop learning about people. I always try to challenge myself each year to be like, hey, is there like a new person I can bring on board that maybe I haven't thought of or heard of yet? So
I think with that, we're actually gonna start wrapping up. So please join me in saying thank you and celebrating Adam and this amazing content he's shared. Thank you so much, Adam, for sharing your expertise. If you all have any other questions, his contact information is actually on the slides, which are in the resource handout that was dropped in the chat earlier, and you will get it in your inbox as well as a follow-up email with the recording of this presentation as well. And if you can scroll a little bit more, next slide. One more time, a reminder to please fill out the feedback survey. This is really helpful for us to know what content you want to see, things that you really enjoyed about this presentation. We really want to hear and cater to your needs as our members. So please definitely give us feedback. Tell us what you want to see, what you enjoy, what you want to do more of. And next slide. And as a reminder, this is part of the Growing School Garden Summit webinar series. This is our third presentation. If you follow the link in your resource handout, you will see that we have 3 more presentations coming up. We're starting again in January with Educating on a Changing Planet, Drought-Resistant and Climate-Resilient Garden Strategies for Future. And that is January 22nd, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And with that, thank you all so much for joining us today. Hope to see you again in our next webinar. And please take care of yourselves. Have a great rest of your week. Take care, everybody.